Why did you come back after all these years?" The old blacksmith looked at the woman standing beneath the fading Montana sunset, her traveling coat dusted with the miles she had crossed, and her eyes carrying the same quiet fire he remembered from long ago. She smiled with a sadness that made the whole world seem to stop. "Because I realized the only place my heart ever belonged was here with you." Ethan Carter had faced blizzards, cattle thieves, droughts, and lonely winters, but nothing had ever shaken him like those words. In 34 years, he had learned how to repair broken wagons, tame frightened horses, and survive when the land offered nothing except hardship. Yet he had never learned how to answer the woman he had spent 15 years trying to forget. Before we ride any farther, welcome to Wild West Tales Stories. If you enjoy heartfelt Western romances filled with unforgettable characters and timeless love, be sure to subscribe and join us for every new adventure across the frontier. Montana Territory, 1887. Clearwater Ridge rested between endless grasslands and distant mountains, where the wind carried the smell of pine and fresh earth. Ethan Carter lived alone on a small ranch his father had built with rough hands and endless determination. Every fence post, every stable beam, every stone fireplace had been placed by someone who believed hard work could outlast sorrow. Since his parents passed away, Ethan had remained there by himself. The neighbors respected him because he always helped when trouble arrived, but nobody truly knew the quiet loneliness waiting inside the old ranch house after sunset. Every morning began before daylight. He fed the horses, repaired tools, checked the cattle, and rode the property until evening painted the hills with gold. It was an honest life, but not a complete one. People often suggested marriage, though Ethan always answered with the same polite smile before changing the subject. Deep inside, he carried memories of someone he believed had become part of another life forever. Her name was Clara Bennett. 15 years earlier, they had been childhood friends who explored rivers, climbed hills, and dreamed beneath endless western skies. Clara loved books more than anyone Ethan had ever known. She believed stories could carry people farther than trains ever could. When her widowed mother accepted work in Chicago, Clara had no choice except to leave Montana. They promised to write, and for a while they did. Then the letters slowly stopped. Life continued, seasons changed, and silence replaced every promise they had made beside the creek. Ethan convinced himself she had married, built a family somewhere far away, and forgotten the ranch boy who had once followed her everywhere. He never blamed her. Some people were meant for cities, while others belonged to lonely valleys beneath open skies. On a cool September afternoon, while repairing a broken wagon wheel outside his blacksmith shop, Ethan noticed the stagecoach arriving from the east. Travelers climbed down one by one until only a single woman remained. She wore a dark blue traveling dress beneath a weathered coat, and although time had changed her appearance, there was no mistaking the determined confidence in the way she stepped onto the dusty street. Ethan froze. The hammer slipped from his hand and landed heavily beside the anvil. Clara Bennett stood only 20 yards away, holding one leather suitcase and looking around the town exactly as though she had left only yesterday. Their eyes met. Neither of them moved. The sounds of wagons, horses, and distant conversations faded until only silence remained between them. Finally, Clara crossed the street with slow, careful steps. "Hello, Ethan," she said softly. He removed his hat without realizing it. "I never thought I'd see you again." She looked at the mountains surrounding the valley before answering. "Neither did I." They walked together toward the small cafe near the church, where everyone seemed too surprised to interrupt them. Over warm coffee, Clara explained that her mother had passed away peacefully during the spring. She had spent years teaching at a girls' academy in Chicago, but after losing the last member of her family, she discovered success meant very little without a place that truly felt like home. Every memory that brought her comfort somehow led back to Montana. Ethan listened more than he spoke, just as he always had. When she asked about his life, he admitted the ranch had become both his purpose and his excuse. It kept him busy enough not to notice how empty the evenings had become. Clara studied him quietly before saying, You still carry everyone else's burdens before your own. Ethan smiled faintly. Some habits survive longer than others. Outside, autumn wind swept golden leaves across the empty street while church bells echoed through Clearwater Ridge. Neither of them realized that the past they believed had ended years ago was only beginning again, and before another sunset arrived, both would face a choice capable of changing every tomorrow that waited beyond the Montana horizon. The following morning, the first light of dawn spread across the Montana hills as Ethan saddled his horse. But for the first time in years, his thoughts stayed far from the cattle and fences waiting beyond the creek. Clara Bennett had returned, and with her came memories he had buried beneath years of hard work and quiet routine. After finishing his morning chores, he rode into Clearwater Ridge carrying a basket of fresh apples from his orchard. He told himself it was simply a friendly visit, yet deep down he knew he would have found any excuse to see her again. Clara had rented the small cottage beside the schoolhouse where the previous teacher had lived. The windows stood open, and books covered nearly every table inside. She was arranging shelves when Ethan knocked gently on the doorframe. She looked up and smiled with the same warmth he remembered from childhood. "You still arrive without making much noise," she laughed. Ethan handed her the basket. The orchard had a good season. She accepted the gift with grateful eyes. "Then I'll make sure none of them go to waste." They spent the afternoon walking through the town together. Clara greeted old neighbors who barely recognized the little girl they had once known. Some welcomed her with tears, others with stories about the years she had missed. Everywhere they went, Ethan noticed people smiling more than usual. It was as though her return had awakened something hopeful inside the town itself. As they reached the creek where they had once spent countless afternoons, Clara stopped beneath the old cottonwood tree. The initials they had carved into its bark as children had faded but were still visible. She gently traced the worn letters with her fingertips. "I used to think this tree would forget us," she whispered. Ethan shook his head. "Some things hold on longer than we expect." Clara looked across the clear water. "I wrote dozens of letters after we moved away." Ethan turned toward her. "I only received the first 6. She looked surprised. "The rest were returned after Father changed addresses several times. I thought you had stopped answering because you wanted to forget me." Ethan lowered his eyes. "I believed you had forgotten me." They stood there in silence while the creek flowed peacefully beside them. Years of misunderstanding disappeared in a single conversation neither had expected to have. That evening, the town gathered for the annual harvest social inside the church hall. Lanterns hung from wooden beams, while neighbors shared food, music, and stories from another successful season. Pete Dawson spotted Ethan standing alone near the entrance and nudged him with a grin. "You planning to stare at her all night or ask her for a dance?" Ethan smiled awkwardly. Before he could answer, Clara appeared beside him wearing a simple green dress that matched her bright eyes. "I was about to ask the same question," she teased. Ethan laughed quietly and offered his hand. The fiddle began playing a slow melody as they stepped onto the wooden floor. Around them, couples turned gracefully beneath the lantern light, but neither Ethan nor Clara noticed anyone else. They spoke about childhood memories, forgotten adventures, and dreams that had survived despite the passing years. Halfway through the dance, Clara looked at him with unusual seriousness. "Can I ask you something?" "Always," Ethan replied. "Did you ever marry?" Ethan's answer came after a thoughtful pause. "No." "Because of the ranch?" she asked gently. He looked into her eyes and spoke with complete honesty. "Because every time I imagined building a life with someone, the only face I ever saw was yours." Clara stopped dancing for just a heartbeat. Emotion filled her eyes. But before she could answer, the music ended and applause echoed through the hall. She smiled softly, though her heart was clearly full of words she had not yet found the courage to say. Later that night, Ethan walked her back to the cottage beneath a sky crowded with stars. Neither hurried to say goodnight. Finally, Clara spoke. Chicago gave me opportunities, friends, and work I was proud of, but it never gave me peace. Ethan listened quietly. The day I stepped off that stagecoach, she continued, I realized I hadn't come back searching for a place. She met his eyes. I came back searching for you. Ethan felt every lonely year fall away like dust carried by the evening wind. He reached for her hand carefully, giving her every chance to step away. Instead, Clara intertwined her fingers with his as naturally as if they had never been apart. Above them, the stars stretched endlessly across the western sky, and both understood that the hardest miles of their journey had already been traveled. Neither of them knew that a difficult decision was still waiting just beyond the horizon, one that would test not only their love, but also the future they had only just begun to reclaim. 3 days later, just as Clearwater Ridge settled back into its peaceful rhythm, a telegram arrived from Chicago. Clara unfolded the paper with steady hands, but Ethan saw the concern in her eyes before she spoke. The girls' academy, where she had taught for nearly a decade, wanted her to return immediately. The headmistress had retired unexpectedly, and the school board was offering Clara the position she had worked years to earn. It meant respect, security, and a future many teachers only dreamed about. The offer required an answer within 1 week. That evening they sat beside the familiar creek where their story had first begun. Neither spoke for several minutes as the water moved quietly over smooth stones. Finally, Clara folded the telegram and looked toward the mountains. 15 years ago, life decided for us, she said softly. This time the choice is mine. Ethan nodded. Then you should choose the life that brings you peace. She turned to him. You're not going to ask me to stay? He smiled gently. Love isn't asking someone to give up their dreams. If Chicago is where your future belongs, I'll help you pack your bags myself. Clara searched his face, almost hoping to find hesitation, but there was only kindness. She suddenly laughed through the tears gathering in her eyes. You still don't understand, do you? Ethan looked confused. The dream was never the position. She reached into her bag and pulled out another envelope. I accepted this offer months ago, before I returned to Montana. He frowned. Then why come back? Clara smiled. Because before I answered them, I needed to find out whether I'd left my heart here. She stepped closer. Now I know. She slowly tore the telegram into small pieces, letting the wind carry them across the creek. My future isn't waiting in Chicago. Ethan stared at her, hardly believing what he had seen. Are you certain? I've never been more certain of anything. She took both of his hands. I spent years building a career. I'm proud of it. But home isn't always the place where you're most successful. Sometimes it's the place where someone has quietly loved you, even when you were hundreds of miles away. News traveled quickly through Clearwater Ridge. Within days, the townspeople learned Clara had decided to remain. Mrs. Harper offered her the empty cottage permanently. The school board immediately invited her to become the town's full-time teacher. Parents celebrated because their children adored her, and the children celebrated because Miss Bennett was staying forever. As winter settled across Montana, Ethan found himself riding into town more often than ever before. Every evening ended with the same walk from the schoolhouse to the little cottage, talking about books, ranch life, and dreams for the future. One snowy afternoon in December, Ethan asked Clara to meet him beneath the old cottonwood tree beside the creek. Fresh snow covered the ground, and the mountains glowed beneath the setting sun. He removed a small velvet box from his coat pocket. I've spent too many years waiting for another chance, he said quietly. I don't want to waste another day. Clara Bennett, will you marry me? Tears filled her eyes before he had even finished speaking. She smiled with complete certainty. Yes. 1,000 times, yes. They were married the following spring, in the little white church overlooking Clearwater Ridge. The entire town attended. Pete Dawson claimed he had never cried at a wedding. though everyone noticed him wiping his eyes during the ceremony. Children from Clara's classroom filled the church with wildflowers they had gathered themselves, and after the vows were spoken, the church bell rang so loudly it echoed through the valley. Ethan and Clara built their home on a gentle hill overlooking the creek where their friendship had first begun. Even after marriage, Clara continued teaching because Ethan believed her gift belonged to every child in Clearwater. Years later, when neighbors asked Ethan why he always smiled whenever he watched his wife reading on the porch while children played in the yard, he simply answered, "Some people spend their lives searching for happiness. I was fortunate enough that mine found its way back home." And every evening, as the Montana sun disappeared behind the mountains and golden light settled across the valley, Ethan would quietly reach for Clara's hand. She always held it without a word, because the greatest love stories are not built by grand speeches or perfect timing. They are built by two people who choose each other, again and again, through every season of life. Thank you for writing with Wild West Tales Stories. If this journey touched your heart, don't forget to like this story. Subscribe to the channel and join us again for another unforgettable ride across the American frontier. Until next time, keep the campfire burning and the spirit of the Wild West alive.